Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Turned Into Punk Classics, a show where we take old episodes of Turned Into Punk that have been lost from the internet and return them to their previous glory by sticking them back on the feed. You can find this podcast on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and all other forms of social media. Well, that's pretty much it. At Turned Into Punk. You can find me on Twitter or Instagram at LeftForDamien. I play in a band. More information can be found at fuckedup.cc. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy another TOAP Classic. Walter, thank you for coming on for a second attempt to do this.
All right. Yeah, cool. Happy we can make it work.
Well, I got to say, like this, you are, I've let you know this a couple times now, but you are the one that has gotten away from me, it seems like, interviewing-wise.
Oh, wow.
So
I'm glad it's come to pass.
Well, that's right. Now I say this, knock on wood. But
yeah.
But I guess I wanted to kind of start this one off the way I start them all off, which is, how did you get into punk? Do you remember the first time you ever came across the genre?
I guess, I think the Ramones maybe was the first contact with the idea of it. I saw a double feature. My cousin took me to see The Kids Are All Right, and the double feature was Rock and Roll High School and Kids Are All Right. So,
good double bill.
Rock and Roll High. Oh yeah, it was great. And I mean, I knew who the Who were obviously, but I had no idea what the first movie was about, and that just made me think I want to be where those people are. I want to be in that world.
So was your cousin already into it, or was your cousin more just like taking you because you guys were both into the Who? Or
my cousin was taking me on a Who side of it, so yeah. I don't think he knew about it at all. And I guess, if it's a double feature, you want to get your money's worth. You go see both movies.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if it made much of an impression on him. I mean, the movie, you've seen it. It's just kind of, maybe the band wouldn't have even, for me, it made a big impression. I don't know if he cared about it that much. He was older than me. He was into, like, Leonard Skinner and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, did he go to shows with you after that point?
No, he was older than me. He was much older. He was like, he was great. But he was like 18 or something. I remember he was collecting unemployment. I would go with him to the unemployment office, and I was, probably like 12 or something like that. And he'd let me clean his weed, like get the seeds out of it. And he was just cool. He was just super cool. And it more hit me, but I was little, so I don't know when I eventually was even able to find the Rock and Roll High School album or any Ramones albums, but I guess it would have been the first one I found was the one that Phil...
End of the Century?
End of the Century.
Yeah.
That was the one that I got.
The Phil Spector one.
Yeah, that was the only one I could find, because I guess they were making a push on that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was at Sam Goody. And I was like, finally, the Ramones. I wasn't so psyched on the way they looked on the cover, but it said Ramones on it, so I was in.
So was that like...
And the record's good.
Oh, it's a great record, and I think that's a record that at the time people judged kind of harshly. Like,
yeah, but it's great.
Oh, it's amazing. Oh, so like one of the best.
Yeah.
So how old were you kind of when you think you found that Ramones record, approximately?
Well, it would have been 1980, so I was like, oh, wow, I was younger than I thought. I was, I guess, 11.
Wow, yeah, you were super young. And so were you seeing punk kids kind of around you, or were you, like, seeing it on the news at all or anything, or was this kind of like your only connection to it?
I mean, there was maybe some idea of having heard of the Sex Pistols because Sid Vicious had lived in New York, and there was, I guess, around that time, the whole Sid and Nancy Spungen type of thing was probably in the newspapers, but not in Rockaway. Rockaway, and that was another connection to the Ramones, is I grew up in Rockaway Beach in New York, and they have the rock song. So that was sort of on the radar too, and in Rockaway, but there was no punks, like you would have been. Rockaway's like a beach town, but it's also just kind of like a little small town, a lot of kind of cops and firemen and stuff like that. It's not a town where you're going to want to stand out too much in that way. That kind of came later. Like I lived with my mom, and we moved to Astoria, Queens, which is that's where I found like punk kids and started to go to CB's. But that wasn't until I guess my sophomore year in high school. But it was closer to the city and just a different vibe. And that's the home of like Murphy's Law and Kraut. Like we moved to Astoria, I saw a Kraut sticker on a like a no parking sign or something, and I had seen Kraut on MTV like earlier that year.
Oh yeah,
and I was know about, you know what I mean? You'd see something like that, MTV would give them a shot, but there was no way to know where to get a Kraut record. You know, at that time, I wasn't like going by myself too much. But yeah, so then I found community in a store. It was like Murphy's Law, Token Entry, Kraut, and then I was going to CB's and kind of just went from there.
So when you started kind of, I guess, between that Ramones record and between you guys moving to Astoria, was there any sort of other stuff that you were kind of seeing on, like, you know, I guess Kraut on MTV, but I guess you had your kind of radar tuned for it at that point, but just picking up bits and pieces?
Oh yeah, I was into music, you know, so I would read, I would read like Rolling Stone for just reviews and Cream magazine, and just, you know, I was listening to like a lot of, and also British stuff. I listened to a station out in Long Island called WLIR, and they were really cool. They would play a lot of the British singles. So like I heard the first Smith single whenever it came out. I guess that would have been like 81, 82, whenever that came out, and immediately hooked into that. And I was into Joy Division, you know, when it was like they were still around, and but I was a little kid. I was just hearing it on the radio, and you know, my mom went to England and brought back actually the Joy Division record, Closer. And I wasn't sure if the band was called Closer or if it was called Joy Division. And so I was into that kind of stuff, and which was tangent on punk stuff as well. So I was exploring that, getting into the Buzzcocks, getting stuff that was accessible at like, I mean, not Sam Goody exactly, but, you know, I started to go into Manhattan and find like Bleecker Bobs and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I guess, you know, like, did you feel kind of isolated? Were there other kids that you were kind of able to share this with, or were you just kind of like discovering this stuff by yourself?
I was I had like a little squad of kind of like denim jacket dirtbag kids that I hung with, that we were like into AC/DC, and I could kind of transition them into some stuff that I was into, but not too much. It wasn't until I moved to Astoria that I could fully, you know, where I was hanging out with kids that knew lots more than I did. And I kind of started to let go of the British kind of new wave stuff in favor of you know, just getting deeper and deeper into hardcore and punk and you know, all the different layers of that, you know, onion.
Well, it's funny because that British stuff definitely comes back as an influence on you. Like as an outsider in a big way later on. So it's funny that you had to repress it for a couple years. Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't even so much like I was ashamed of it. It was just, I guess I didn't have anybody to really share it with that much, and it just, my interest had changed. You know, I was into like skateboarding, and I wanted to know about, and especially when you get into like hardcore and punk, or particularly hardcore, like, because you're a new person to it, like, you want to know everything about it so you don't get caught out there, you know, like someone talking about some band and, you know, they're talking about Black Flag and you really only know, you know, TV Party. You just don't want to be, you know, you just kind of want to know more. And so it was work, you know, you had to like explore all these different bands, and I just wasn't paying attention to, I think by the time the Smiths came around to New York, where I was old enough to go, I just wasn't even interested in them at that point, which is kind of, whatever. It was strange. But yeah, I mean, when I wasn't before that, I was reading. I was trying to get whatever I could get into. I remember reading like the first REM EP coming out, and just because the review was so good, I bought Murmur, and that's a definitely, that early REM stuff was really pretty sick at the time, and it still holds up. And like Velvet Underground, I was listening to that. Like it just was all just kind of, it's fun. I mean, if you get into music and in it sort of like I don't know if it's academic, but just find something, get more to know more about it, and I was definitely searching at that time.
Yeah, I guess that's one of those things that when you're right, when you get to this music genre, punk broadly speaking, or like anything kind of outside of the mainstream, it requires such a search at that point to get information that you want to find out as much as you can. And it's just like,
oh yeah,
scraps, and you're putting it together in the pre-internet world by hand.
Yeah. I got super lucky in high school. There was a kid there that I had just moved to Astoria, and I don't know what I had on that identified me as being into punk, but someone picked up on it and goes, "Hey, are you into hardcore?" And I was like, yeah. I was okay, cool. I'm into hardcore too. I have a bunch of records. I'll just give you. I'm not really that into it anymore. And
what an amazing day! Holy!
He gave me so many insane records, like both the Minor Threat EPs, like Negative Approach, Process of Elimination EP, all this British stuff like Red Alert, Cockney Rejects. Like he basically gave me the sickest starter kit of hardcore, and each one of these records was like a complete mystery and told about some different world that you wanted to just get into somehow, and like putting Minor in My Eyes EP, which is one of the first ones I put on, and just having no preconception about what it is you're going to hear, and holding that like black and white sleeve and thinking, and you look at the picture and it's like, this is happening now. It just looks like just from, it was found in a cave in France or something, like from some prehistoric, and the music that came out was, okay, if you like the Ramones, it seems fast, Blitzkrieg Bop is cool, and I'm not knocking it, but when you hear, the song In My Eyes take off, it's just like, holy shit, what is happening?
Yeah.
And so that really sparked it too. So I kind of had, that was a lucky thing. I don't know why that kid gave me those records, but I think, that first wave of hardcore had already kind of come and gone by the, would have been like 84 or 85 at that point. And so Minor Threat had already broken up, and, this kid was my age. So he was probably going when he was like 13 or, something like that with, I don't know who he was going with, but it was popular. Hardcore was cool and happening in Queens at that time.
Well, it's funny because I just had Lou Barlow on the podcast, and he was saying that's when he kind of got out of it, like 84.
Yep.
That's when
that whole squad, I think, dipped out at that point and got into other either metal or cooler indie rock type of stuff.
Yeah, that's like the birth of that kind of American indie rock wave, I guess, are all the first hardcore dropouts.
Yeah, and I was into that too. I was into Husker Du and the Minutemen and stuff on SST because that was getting reviewed in Rolling Stone, and so I was following that as well. But as I started going to shows at CB's, it kind of took a different direction, and I wasn't so interested in Sonic Youth as much anymore.
Well, how did that start? So you moved to Astoria, Queens, and then what's your sort of like first entry point to kind of the scene around you?
Well, I saw that crowd sticker, so then I knew that there was something happening. And there's a Con Edison plant in Astoria that's right across from Rikers Island, and there's this little at the entry gate. There's this structure that's in the shape of they're sort of pyramids in a way, like flattened out, kind of like Inca pyramids. But anyway, they're perfect for, at that time when there's no skate parks, they were amazing like banks to skate. So I noticed that there was like skateboarder kids hanging out over there, and like I couldn't skate at that time, but I took note that there was these punk kids hanging out there, and was trying to figure out a way to, it's just kind of awkward to like walk up and just sit around a group of teenagers and try to make friends with them. I don't know how that happens when you're a kid.
They think you're a narc.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know what I mean? People are not generally friendly like that unless you just stick around long enough. But for me, I got lucky. I got a job at a supermarket, and some of those punk kids would come into the supermarket from time to time. And so I became more aware of them. And then eventually one of them got a job there. And I was the wagon boy at the supermarket. And this guy was my wagon boy trainee. So I trained, and that guy turned out to be Arthur Smilios, who's in Gorilla Biscuits. And so then we just became best friends quickly, and he kind of brought me in to that, to that hardcore crew, which was Token Entry mainly, and Kraut, and by extension Murphy's Law. And so that was, then I was kind of on the inside and was going to to matinees regularly. And so then I got in with it with definitely the right people. I'm still friends with all those dudes.
Yeah, what an amazing kind of first group to kind of fall in with.
Yeah, and it was, it was at that time, it was kind of, the scene was, I realized like I was not there at the right time, for what I was interested in. When I'm talking about like Minor Threat, like the sound of the scene at that time was a sort of, it would range from a sort of jokey anarcho punk thing, like False Prophets, which were on like Alternative Tentacles, or Virus, who were sort of like in that sort of same vein, like older punk art student type people, where the music was not that important, like maybe kind of crappy, but the message or the vibe was speaking to people older than me, maybe. And the other side of it was crossover, which would have been, one of the early matinees I saw at CB's was COC. And I might have been on it would have been probably Technocracy. And that was like the big album, and which is a great album. But, this is, I was looking for real hardcore, and it just, that had already sailed. Really.
Yeah, it's metal by that point.
Yeah, and I was not interested in metal at that point. I was into like AC/DC, like things like that. Maybe a few years before would have been more my interest, but I saw myself as like punk, hardcore, even new wave. Like I didn't see myself being into metal.
Had you been to like another show before you went to the matinee? Like, was that your first concert ever?
No, No, I'd seen Dead Kennedy. There was big shows at Webster Hall. So I'd seen Dead Kennedys there, GBH.
We were talking about that GBH.
Circle Jerks. Yeah. So the big bands like Exploited would come through. And so you would get generally like, there would be some New York local bands on those bills, but no one really mind-blowing to me. I like False Prophets. They were cool. Maybe I would appreciate them more now, but in my mind at that time, it just seemed crappy and like kind of some old punk ideal, but not what I wanted really.
Yeah.
Not what I was hungry for. So the New York scene was just a little flatlining at that point. And, it was kind of the leftovers of, the prior greatness. So even though like The Abused or Antidote, Cause for Alarm, all those bands were gone at that point. So there was Agnostic Front were around, but they were working on their crossover album.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of the end. I mean, it was prior to, but it was the end of that. The writing on the wall was there somehow. Like everyone thought it was dead until Youth Today came around. I mean, Murphy's Law were still ripping, in my opinion, and and AF were still great too. But I guess at that time Murphy's Law would have been the ultimate band in terms of like scene bands in New York. And to me, Murphy's Law is like is hardcore in their following and their essence, whatever. But as a band, they're like just an entertaining, awesome rock band.
Yeah,
And,
or like a punk band type thing too, like a real punk kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, and I loved them, but it wasn't like the New York scene that eventually kind of came out, or even the one that came before, which I think was really, there's a bunch of great classic New York 7-inches that don't get as much light, or Urban Waste. I got the Urban Waste test pressing from that kid too. That's another thing that I still have. I have the Urban Waste test pressing.
Shut the fuck up.
And the kid just gave it to me, and so it was insane.
So who was this kid? Was this kid a dude in a band?
No,
or something,
he was just he was a cool kid. Like, he wore a leather jacket. I think he was probably into metal at that time. He was into like Maiden, and he's like, I used to go to these hardcore shows. I got a bunch of singles. Here you go.
Whoa.
And I'd have to look at my yearbook to remember his name. I'm embarrassed that I don't know his name, but I went to school there for like 2 years, and whatever, it was a long time ago. But
yeah, absolutely. But still, that is like rate, that guy gave you, I don't know, conservatively like a $3,000, $2,000.
Oh, dude, Teen Idols. I had Teen Idol 7-inch in that, and SOA 7-inch. Now I'm thinking about it. Like, it was insane. It was like, here you go, you're a record collector right away.
Well, it just seems like
it wasn't even like.
No, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, I just didn't even know what I had. You know what I mean? I saw that Henry Rollins was in SOA, and then that kind of had rung a bell because I knew who Black Flag were because of TV Party and Damaged, which you could get at that time at, not like Sam Goody, but,
it was around
the level below that. You could find it.
Yeah, right? Yeah. It's crazy because he must have just bought every like seminal record as it was coming out, like that first wave of hitters. He was just like, boom, get it, boom, get it.
Yeah, and I don't know if the fact that he gave them all to me, like, they weren't worth anything at that time.
No, exactly. No, exactly. It was just like, it was your hands are the garbage, probably. Like, realistically.
It's something like that, because it's there was no second wave to like be nostalgic for the first wave so much.
Absolutely.
I'm guessing. I mean, it's hard, when you're saying that Lou Barlow had already moved on, like, it was the light of the scene was that this was not going anywhere, and which was kind of depressing for me, because when I got in there, I realized it quickly too. It's like, there's not much here for me.
Was it like, were you the only one? Like, were the other people around you at this time, like Arthur and those people, were they like into the new scene and like this is cool, or were they also kind of yearning for something else?
We were into it because it was being a teenager and having an identity of being into hardcore and listening to this really kind of shitty sounding music and skateboarding, and there was so much to discover. We were getting into things that had already happened, just like there's so much, Angry Samoans or Descendants or, the whole minutia of like, Oi and there was just so much to be into without going to the shows. We would just skate and listen. And I think that's the way it is for a lot of people around the world. You know what I mean? Like, you don't necessarily need Black Flag to come to your town for you to be living the lifestyle, but yeah, I think we were all like Token Entry at that time. For me, even was not like, they were my friends, and I thought it was cool to be friends with them, but they sounded like a rock band to me, and they didn't the right way, in my opinion. I basically wanted everyone to, look like, I wanted it to be, Ian MacKaye, Black Flag, like the classic thing. It's just not happening. But we were still having fun. I had a leather jacket. It was cool.
Would you see like the older, like, I guess because you had these records, you would have been a fan of like Urban Waste and Abused and that first wave.
Yeah.
Were those people still hanging around? Like, would you see those people like at shows? Because Urban Waste did a later record too, right?
They did. I don't remember the Urban Waste guys being around, but Ditto from Major Conflict was like he would be like in Outsiders. He would be like the Patrick Swayze character. He was like the older dude that like everyone respected. He was cool and fair, but he could beat the shit out of anybody.
Yeah.
So I was like, not even like ponyboy status. So I was like one of the nameless. I was like Leif Garrett, whatever. I was in some like lame part of the Outsiders crew, but Ditto was kind of a star, and Jimmy was around, and Jimmy was, also Jimmy was just like is to me like celebrity. He's just so powerful as a personality. So people like Jimmy were around. Ditto was still around, but Ditto wasn't even into hardcore. Like at that point, he was into something way cooler that I wasn't invited to. Wouldn't understand at the time.
So I guess around the point you started going there, you said like Youth of the Day was really. Actually, before we get to the Youth of the Day stuff, I wanted to kind of just what were the Circle Jerk shows like in New York at that point? Because you always hear about how crazy Circle Jerk shows were around that time in LA and stuff. Was it kind of the same in New York?
They were a band like Circle Jerks, GBH, Exploited. These were the bands that you could get their T-shirts at Bleecker Bob's, and their records were relatively well distributed.
Yeah.
So you would draw kids from the suburbs when they would play. So the Circle Jerks could play Webster Hall, and I don't know if they sold it out, but they could fill it, which was, I don't know, like Webster Hall's probably like 1,400 people.
Yeah.
And so that would be the big show. So you'd see people with mohawks and, really doing the look, bondage pants, and you'd see skin. It would be like the Ball. Everyone would put on their real punk clothes and do their real punk dances and, be seen and, and try to learn. And so Circle Jerks had that marquee value at that time, but they were past their prime, I would say. I think they would, in a sense, I think I saw them on Wonderful, which is sort of a rock AC/DC record.
Yeah, I'd say it's like the fourth best record.
Yeah, it's not. I'm not saying it sucks.
Yeah,
like there's some good songs that still stick in my head, but I thought it was cool to just kind of check it off the list,
Yeah.
And I was seeing those bands at all their kind of, like I saw Dead Kennedys on Frankenchrist, which is an awesome record, and they were great, but they didn't really. It didn't seem like they liked each other or the audience. As I remember, and they went on at like 2 a.m, and I was tired. I was a kid. Staying up that late was new to me, and I didn't have any drugs. I wasn't into that at that time. But it was a Circle Jerk show at that time was like that. People looking the part, doing the thing, and having that experience. And I think it was because they were known that it drew the most people. And CB's would just be sort of unfathomable in a way. Like you just wouldn't know what you were seeing or why people liked it. It was trickier to really get to CB's on the right day. Like I think the first band I saw there was Adrenaline OD.
I was going to say like that's one of the bands that I would say. Yeah, did you like that band or any of that New Jersey stuff?
I loved them. Yeah, they were great. And I was just taking it in as not when you're first coming to a show, you get into anything you can get your hands on.
Yeah.
But Adrenaline Overdose they were funny, and that appeals to me. And they had some sort of like lighter edge to them that, like put them in a category of how the Descendants were funny in a way, although they weren't melodic like the Descendants, but they were goofy. And so it was a lighthearted punk comedy kind of thing. And so I like them, but as soon as, the deeper I dug into it and the more I became a scenester, like they didn't really figure in my mind, less and less.
What about Mental Abuse? Did you ever see them?
Mental Abuse I saw, but they to me were also not in the they were not in the movers and shakers.
Yeah,
for me.
Yeah, okay.
They would have been like a cool name and people had heard of them or whatever, but it wasn't in the vanguard of the movement as I saw it.
Yeah. So I guess speaking of the vanguard of the movement, when Youth Today kind of first shows up, do you remember how, I guess, you first heard about it, or like was your first kind of contact with that?
I think my friend had the 7-inch, and we were all, and the people that at this point I was hanging out with people from Jackson Heights, and that's how I met Civ and from Gorilla Biscuits, and they had a whole squad over there. Only we had some girls in Astoria, but in Jackson Heights, but they were all boyfriended up, and in Jackson Heights there was a bunch of girls in their punk scene that were, it was just cool. So me and Arthur would like skateboard all the way to Jackson Heights to hang out with their squad, and they were into bands that we weren't into, so we were sharing on that level, and so it kind of, the scene got bigger in that way. And then one of them got the Youth Today single, and it was just, it was everything we wanted to hear. I mean, it was so easy to get it. And what they were saying was, for those who love, Agnostic Front, Minor Threat, who wish the scene was like that, we're here to like make it that way. And, in like, the chorus was listed on the lyric sheet as the mosh, and there was always a chant, and it was exactly what we wanted to hear. It was perfect.
So, kind of like, did any of you guys have contact with them at this point, or was it just like this was on Positive Fourth? It's worth picking up.
It was. Yeah, I think they had, one of us had gone to see them. I think maybe they had opened for AF at CB's, and they got the 7-inch at the show.
Okay.
And I wasn't at that show for whatever reason. And so then that became a whole, a thing of like, we've got to see Youth Today. And so I didn't see them, maybe it was whatever amount of time later, and they played in Long Island, and we took the train out, and the show was Sick of It All's first show, Straight Ahead, and Youth of Today. And that show just, Sick of It All kind of made me think, I got to make a band, and we could do this. And then Straight Ahead came on and was like so straight edge and insane, like Tommy Carroll and Craig Satari. It was insane. The songs were like, I mean, for those not familiar with Straight Ahead, it's just whatever Youth Today is fast, they were super slow compared to Straight Ahead.
Yeah.
And the energy and the power was incredible. And then Youth Today came up, and it was with Craig and Tommy on drums. And I felt Straight Ahead were better that day, but Ray Capo's performance and just the way that he, his oration skills, it was undeniable. And I knew the songs, and so I felt at that moment, this is we can work with this. We're gonna do something. There's something happening, here. And I bought the Straight Ahead record that day, the Warzone comp, and it's like 7 minutes or 5 minutes of like with 12 songs, and it's just insane.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's so much I want to ask you kind of coming out of that. I guess first, had you seen Tommy and Craig kind of around, like with NYC Mayhem or just like at CB's and stuff?
I don't recall.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I did. There were certain people that would stick out. I remember seeing Timmy Chunks at the Dead Kennedy show and just thinking, that dude looks like he was made in a laboratory. He just looked so scary. He was wearing a leather vest and with no shirt under it and smoking a cigarette. He just looked like the Circle Jerks guy come to life, but more scary. And I don't know, there'd be people that you would see and that I think like, I got to stay away from that person. He's so scary. And then eventually become friends. And then me and Timmy ended up, he got me into so much hip hop, and we just used to listen to rap all the time. But No, I don't remember seeing Tommy, but that much. But he was a force. I mean, he was just cool as shit, and just had a vibe.
Mm-hmm. Were you into 7 Seconds at all too prior to this? I guess.
Yes, I got the Skins, Brains, and Guts EP in that first batch of records. That just reminds me.
That's awesome.
And so yeah, I was into 7 Seconds, but not beyond the Skins, Brains, and Guts EP.
Yeah.
So it was Youth of Today that got me to take a closer look at them. Although I was probably familiar with Walk Together, Rock Together, which had come out not that long before.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, once I saw that Youth Today was on Positive Force and made the connection to, I think Kevin Seconds produced it, you know,
yeah,
quote unquote,
yeah,
and so then it started to look like this bigger thing where there was Youth of Today, like in Connecticut, New York, and 7 Seconds, you know, on the bigger stage, traveling around the country, and that there was some sort of, you know, and eventually, you know, Uniform Choice was bubbling up, and when their record came out, you know, they really went for the Minor Threat thing.
Oh yeah,
and then the T-shirt kind of revolution, and the whole kind of started to really, you know, crystallize, I guess. So then there was a scene happening. There was like a movement, and it was one that I was into on a musical level because of where the influences were coming from, and on an ideological level because of what it was trying to say. Like what, you know, it was obviously like bringing it back, you know, although what it was bringing back was only like 2 or 3 years old, you know, but it had seemed like it was a, you know, a millennium ago.
Well, having been part of a bringing it back movement when it was, I guess, 12 years old at that point or 10 years old at that point, you know, that bringing it back vibe still beats strong every few years.
Yeah. I mean, you let it die out for a little bit. And if there's someone that gets it, and understands why it's cool.
Yep.
Then it works. And then eventually everyone starts to go, okay, why is this cool again? And then it dies out again. But there's something, at that time, you know, and also it was all positive messages, which I thought was a cool rebellion within the rebellion,
mm-hmm.
you know, because Murphy's Law was the primary band. And while I didn't really have a problem with drinking and or smoking weed or anything like that, I wasn't into like, you know, I wasn't going to take drugs, smoke dust, hang out on Avenue A, and, you know, I wasn't like that. You know what I mean? So even though I didn't have a problem with it, like I knew I wasn't going to really thrive if that was what the movement was about, you know, that kind of nihilism, like type of thing. So the fact that the movement was about music and about, you know, looking out for each other and all that kind of stuff, I thought, well, yeah, you know, it's not about violence or dust. You know, I can get into this because, you know, I stood behind it on that ideological level.
Well, that's the thing. I guess the party was so hard in New York at that point, even in the punk world.
Yeah.
That it wasn't like you could just,
I knew I wasn't cut out for it. Like I wasn't gonna, you know what I mean? I hung out with some bad kids in high school, but I wasn't the type of kid that was gonna go the whole way and go to like reform school type of shit. I wasn't into that. And the you know, the kids that started the scene in New York were, you know, they were fucking kids with tough stories and you know, and they built it, you know, which is amazing. But something new was taking shape, and it is also, you know, Youth Today. When you think about where Youth Today was coming from, they were coming from the suburbs, so it became a suburban, and it got bigger, just like in California. You know, it's like was a suburban thing. That's what made it so big. In New York, it was tiny, but once Youth Today came in, and you know, Revelation Records started coming, it got out to the suburbs, and so then, you know, kids from New Jersey, Long Island, and you know, upstate New York were coming to CBGB's, and then it was full, you know, but it was no longer that Lower East Side, you know, just for lack of a better word to describe it, like Angel Dust vibe, you know, those people they had all moved on into some degree too, and into like Murphy's Law were on like Rock Hotel. So they were becoming Agnostic Front was like touring the country at that time, like on, Megaforce Records or whatever they were on. And so that whole scene kind of either dropped out and gave away their records, or were kind of aiming at bigger prizes, I guess. And in that absence, this whole Youth Today, Revelation Records thing took its place, and I was into it.
I also guess it's because you're like younger too. Those people were older, so it must be like, there's like that weird sort of, even though it's just a few years, generation gap.
Oh, for sure. I mean, they were the seniors and I was a freshman.
Yeah.
So, it was, they were, I always felt like the kid, and trying to kind of keep quiet and, so no one would pick on me and just be cool, and that was my strategy for survival. But once it became like more about the music and the Youth of Today thing took hold, and then it just wasn't about the same things anymore. And for some people, in some ways it kind of gentrified the scene. So something was kind of lost, but I'm happy that I got to see both to the degree that I did. I got to see it before it was gentrified. And I also enjoyed, the nice new restaurants of, when the Youth Today movement came in, the better produce that came in. And you get kale now. It was great.
So I guess like post Youth Today, had you played music at all? Like, were you playing music at all, or at this point, or?
Yeah, I mean, when I was into the stuff I was talking about, like AC/DC, and I was actually into AC/DC and Dead Kennedys at the same time when I started to play guitar. I remember asking my guitar teacher to teach me California Uber Alice, and he wouldn't do it based on the name of the band. It's like I can't. I think that's just a very offensive name, and I can't teach you. Which just made me more intrigued about Dead Kennedys. But anyways, I had been playing music, and that was a real way for me to at that point to make friends.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I could play guitar, so that means I could make up a band, and that's how I really built my friendships at that time. And especially being new to town, in Astoria. Not that anyone really desperately needed my skills, but it was something. Me and Arthur used to play. We used to jam in his bedroom, playing like Channel 3 songs, and I was into all kinds of stuff too, like the Jam. And there was a point when I could have went ska, because there was a good ska scene in New York, and me and Arthur were contemplating, a defection to the ska, and because there was cuter girls, but it didn't take hold. We were stuck in hardcore.
What a radically different world we would live in today. There's
right?
There's an Elseworld story where the two of you go ska, and it's a different world we live in today.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll never know whether we made the right call or not. But
I think you made the right call. I'm going to say it 100%. You made the right call.
Yeah. Okay. Good. But yeah, there was just a lot of, it's like when you're that age too, there's just so much shit going on. Like something that happened like 2 months ago could seem like super long ago, and, you're over it, so things were moving quick.
Yeah. So I guess when things start, moving from there, at what point were you guys, let's get involved? Like, were you ever like doing a zine, or was your band like, you're like, I want to do a band? That's when my involvement.
Our band, like, it was Gorilla Biscuits was the band formed. First, it was just me singing and a couple of neighborhood kids. Like Arthur he was in token entry at that point, so he was sort of in it, sort of not. And anyway, as that took shape and Civ got in the band, eventually we started playing, but we weren't really that good. And Gorilla Biscuits was kind of like, the name of it was kind of the idea of, Adrenaline OD, like to be kind of like a funny, punky kind of hardcore band, or like Beastie Boys, which is another record I got, Pollywog Stew, in that original collection. As I'm going by these ones and remembering the records in that cache.
Yeah.
But in that kind of a mode, and we made a demo. I didn't think we were that great, to be honest. We weren't, definitely not in the midst of the scene. Sick of It All were way more in it. seemed to hang out more than we did, and knew more than we did. Or YDL, a lot of these other bands. But I guess I think when the Youth Today kind of came in, they started to, and then I joined Warzone, and I don't know, these little things just kind of started to get us a little bit closer to the center of what was going on.
Yeah.
At this time that we got better, and
I guess like when did you first meet all the Warzone people? Like you guys would be seeing them around at your time at the CBGBs thing. Like
it's hard for me. Yeah, I mean, Rabies was larger than life. He was like a main player. I mean, he played in Agnostic Front. He was in Warzone. The dude was huge, and everyone knew him, respected him, feared him, whatever.
Yeah,
he was a prime mover, and I think he was also a cool, nice person that would not, he would be nice to the little kids. So I think he was, maybe I would say, hey, great show or something like that, and he would be nice to me, but I wouldn't say I was on his radar in any way.
Yeah.
And but then I guess maybe when Todd left the band and joined Murphy's Law when they went on tour with Beastie Boys, they had a shakeup in Warzone world, and I really don't know how I got the call, but somehow someone told Rabies that I could play bass, and I found myself on Avenue B, which I had never had the courage to actually go to, rehearsing with Warzone, and Rabies just giving me the insider's view on, what it's really all about here on the Lower East Side. And he was just super cool, and I could play. So the musical side of it, at that time it was me, Rabies, and Batmite, and then I brought Luke in from Gorilla Biscuits, and so then we were Warzone. So then we kind of had this, I mean, obviously I was the junior partner in it. And I wasn't like, I was kind of following their leads, but we were good. We kind of got like a musical vibe going, and that was the lineup that did that first Revelation comp. Was me, Batmite, and Luke together. Yeah. So I was kind of in on that side of it too. So I guess I was like slowly building a sort of a resume in hardcore of like from playing in different bands and meeting people through being able to play guitar. Really, because not any other way.
Did it feel like as it was coming together as a scene at this point?
Oh,
too?
yeah.
Because like here you are playing in Warzone and and Revelation.
For sure. I mean, it was happening. I mean, it was like, if you've, I don't think everyone gets to see like a scene form. You like maybe you see it in high school the year that like your football team wins or something, but it was like that, there was a few bands that were good and started playing CBs regularly, and they were influencing other bands coming into the scene. And before you know it, there was like 10 awesome bands that could sell out CBs or fill it. And they were all, had just gotten into the scene like the year or so before, most of them. So it was germinating quickly. And so it was alive. And then they were doing the shows at the Pyramid Club as well, Rabies and Ray Capo. So they were kind of like, that was like the junior upcomer, kind of like you couldn't get like I remember in Gorilla Biscuits, I would call CBs every single Wednesday trying to get a gig, and they'd be like, okay, cool, yeah, send us your tape. I sent you my tape. Okay, yeah, cool, we'll get back to you. And they would never, ever. It was not easy to get a gig at CBs.
Yeah.
But the Pyramid, you could gig. And so, it opened it up for a lot of younger bands like Side by Side, Gorilla Biscuits, Altercation, who were great, YDL, bands that could maybe get CB's gigs, but not just call up and get it. And so, that whole new squad came up, and eventually it's just like, fuck, all the bands are good. They're all watching each other and trying to top each other. You know what I mean? Because it was all about who had the best mosh parts, who had the best raps.
Yeah, yeah.
And if people are doing it good, if there's like 3 or 4 or 5 bands doing it good, there was like 10 other bands underneath them trying to figure out how to do it better. And that's how it got.
It's funny because Altercation you bring up there, and they're a band that only really has gotten their due in the last, God, I don't know, maybe it's now 10 years, but it seems like the last couple of years. It's funny how much of that stuff that if it wasn't on Revelation or a combined effort to a lesser extent, it's kind of just forgotten.
Yeah, I mean it happens to a lot of bands. It just because they weren't on Revelation, it hurt them because but you wouldn't know that at the time, And Altercation decided to join Warzone, and so they that just didn't happen. But had they put a record out on Revelation, forget it, dude. They were scary, dude. They were like the best of metal mixed with this like skinhead Brooklyn thing. And I liked them, but they were scary. That was the beginning of like me seeing, I mean, I thought that if these guys get popular, the scene's going to get fucking scary and violent again. But you just couldn't argue with how good the music was. Mm-hmm. They were just badass. And, but yeah, like, even look at bands like Underdog or, now that we're nerding out about shit, like, had they been on Revelation, they would be way more, they would probably be more popular now, but they were on Caroline, which was, a great label to be on at that point. They were that was kind of a big time label, but the Caroline people aren't like trying to get, it's not collectible.
No. Caroline
they
didn't have the market figured out in the same way that Revelation had it figured out.
Yeah, Revelation is a very precise thing. So if you get one record by Revelation from that era, you're going to want all of them. Yep. And you can say some are better than others, but by not being on that label, and also the other thing that happened is after the I saw like when Youth Today put out our We're Not This Alone and Gorilla Biscuits had put out our album, and that whole wave of things, kind of fizzled in a way. Like everyone just did their 2 years or 3 years in hardcore, and, just like Lou Barlow, just had enough moshing and finger pointing and wanted to do something else. There was still another wave of bands, which like the New Breed. There's a documentary called New Breed, and I was on tour when all that stuff was going on. But I just saw the documentary, and I was like, fuck, all these bands were really good too. But the timing was off. You know what I mean? If they had been on Revelation, it wasn't like the quality went down. It was just the thing had moved on somehow. And, I think the scene got violent. That's what happened, actually. And so then people were, that whole, the thing about those Revelation bands is all the people from surrounding like suburbs coming into the city to see the shows, made it big and made it like in a way competitive in a healthy way. And so the bands got good. But then once it got violent, then all the suburban kids just didn't want to get their asses kicked for going to the shows. So they, kind of broke off into factions where it would be like at ABC No Rio was kind of like the kind of, for lack of a better, like kind of like nerd intellectual vibe. And then CB's was kind of like, became the kind of like more DMS kind of like tough kind of scene. And then a whole bunch of other people just totally fucked off, got into other stuff, whatever, grunge, Sonic Youth, shoegaze, went to college, gave up,
I guess
post-hardcore. Post-hardcore. That's what it was. That's what I got into. So, which was a combination of all those last things that I just described.
Well, like I guess like was Moondog part of that briefly? Was that like part of that New Breed scene at all, or no? Was that?
Yeah, in a way, yeah. Because I guess at that
are on that comp too.
Yeah, I think so. I think that the Moondog. I guess I saw that. This whole thing had kind of, and also on the Revelation thing also got so much about like T-shirts and everyone looked the same, and it just kind of, I wanted that at one time, and then once it was that, I was bored of it because it was like only like-minded people doing the same, going through the same rituals, and I missed the variety of it. Like I missed Altercation, I missed, Nausea, I missed that variety that gave it such strength. And it had all like factioned off into their little, like as I described, there was like the kind of like tough guy scene, there was the kind of like intellectual scene, and there was like the post-hardcore scene. And so I guess Moondog was kind of trying to take all the good stuff of all that kind of thing and do it in a more damaged kind of way. I was going to say fucked up way. But you know, to make it uglier sounding and less formulaic, and but also, you know, apply the cool parts of it too, you know, like you know, the Minor Threat underpinnings of stuff. And so we played at ABC No Rio. That's actually where I felt it was the most interesting, because it was so DIY and like anybody could play, and there was no it wasn't violent, so it was more about music and fun and community. And so I related to that, but at the same time, you know, I was part of the scene that all those people were trying to escape. So it was a weird position for me to be in. But and Quicksand kind of came out of that as well. But we quickly, you know, we were opening for Danzig all of a sudden, and you know what I mean. So we got into some other weird world, and you know, I guess because we were mixing what we were. Quicksand got more into a rock, like Led Zeppelin mixed with Fugazi kind of thing, and it just had. I think it was swimming in a bigger pool at that point.
Yeah, like I think that's the thing, is like it's not as it's Quicksand is broad, like, you know, like I love Quicksand. I'll be talking to a friend of mine who doesn't like punk at all and just likes rock, and they'll also like Quicksand. And Moondog Moondog had definitely still had that hardcore kind of niche finder in it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that was, and then I was kind of off on another, then it became something totally else. And I was on tour all the time. So it kind of, I lost, you know, not my friendships or, you know, my interest in the bands that, you know, that I liked in that world, or that people I had come up with, like that didn't really change. But as like that kid that was trying to like go to the matinees every week and be active in the scene, I wasn't able to do it. And, I wasn't necessarily interested in it anymore because it had become too, niche, you know, for me.
Well, you'd kind of become like the guys that were around when you first started going to shows at that point, you know, like aged out into something new.
Exactly. And I think, you know, all that stuff and that experience completely continues to inform, you know, mostly in a good way, what I do, you know, and how I see things, you know, because it taught me, like, seriously, like, you can do it yourself. Like, you will be surprised. If you want to do it, you can do it. You can, you know, make up the songs, book the shows, make the tour, make the record. You know, when I got into the major label world, they seemed to think that things couldn't be done without, you know, all this apparatus and, you know, meetings and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, of course I went along with it. It was the world that had agreed, you know, had signed up for in a way. And I wasn't the one to change it necessarily, but I still know, like, you know, here I am on tour by myself. You know, it's because I what I learned in hardcore, like, just fucking do it, you know, don't wait for someone else to make it happen. You know, go for it, you know, freak out.
Well, that definitely took me like off guard the first time I met you, because you just like drove up to the show. You were opening for City and Color in Toronto, and you just drove up in a car. And like you knew all the Alexis guys, you were their friend, and they knew how low key you were. But to me, you were like the biggest rock star. And I'm like, what do you mean, just driving up in a car? They're like, yeah, drive up in a car and play these shows. I was just like, holy shit! But like, you're right. That's that punk rock thing that informs it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe something's lost. Maybe I should be more like.
Maybe you should be more.
I should kind of try to be more of a jerk about things, or at least to keep up some sort of rock star image. But I'm just into what I'm doing. You know what I mean? And I don't. And it's like, by virtue of like whatever I've done right, you know, I'm still, you know, people are still asking me to do stuff, and I'm always trying to think of ways to kind of make something cooler or play off of what's going on or in music or what's going on with me, my last release, like where do I go? And each thing I do is, is always like an attempt for sure to say something completely different. And I think that's I don't know if that's cool or good or bad, but that's just the way that I've been able to survive in a business that's like, I don't know, I never see it as a business even. I mean, I realize it now that it is, but that wasn't my entry into it. My entry was like, we're kids, we're playing shows, it's basically like, I'm not good at skateboarding, maybe I can be good at hardcore. You know what I mean? And trying to make that communication. And I think that's, not only in my aesthetic of like how I work and, and I know like talking to like Jay and like that generation of people, like Dinosaur, those guys, that's how they are too.
Mm-hmm.
They're dudes.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like, it doesn't have that pretense because you came up in hardcore. I mean, there'll be people that are like treat you with a lot of reverence or whatever, and that's great. But we're just making music and trying, and it's cool that we get to fuck around and do different kinds of things, and also to to keep it in mind that where you came from and all that kind of stuff, but not being like burdened by it, just being cool with it.
Yeah, no, and I like, honestly, I don't want to keep you all day because I could talk to you all day. So, and there's so many places I want to go and talk more about, but that's a pretty great point to end it on. But before I let you go, there's two questions I have to ask you about.
Yeah.
Number one, because it's my wife's favorite movie, Empire Records and the Empire Records soundtrack. That was your first soundtrack, right?
I don't know. I think we were on the California soundtrack with Brad Pitt and Juliette Lewis.
Really? Oh, shit.
That's the one that I went to. Oh. And it was funny. I went with a whole crew of people. Like, yeah, we're in the movie. And it's just like maybe 3 seconds of Tom Capone's guitar solo. And everyone's just not even noticing it at all. And it's just, hey, guys, that was it. Did that rock you out? But Empire Records, to be honest, I swear I've never seen it.
Oh, you've never seen it?
I've heard that we're in it, and it's a cool scene, and that's enough for me. I don't want to see it, and then I'm just cool with it being and existing. I love that.
Yeah, no, I think it's better leaving it that way too. The same guy did Pump Up the Volume, and he's Canadian, I think.
Yeah, it Pump Up the.
He did Pump Up the Volume. And then he did that movie, and then he came back to Canada and did this movie called New Waterford Girl, which is actually really good. You should see that movie.
Okay. I like Pump Up the Volume. I saw that maybe a year or so ago and watched it again. It's a good one.
Well, let me tell you, then you got to give Empire Records a spin, maybe.
Yeah, okay. I guess I just don't, I'd be like, oh my God, here it comes. But yeah, that's cool.
Okay.
I'm psyched to be in that.
And then I guess also because we're talking about crazy, obscure bands, the Revelation Red Herring, Slipknot. Did you ever?
I was a fan.
I love that Slipknot 7-inch so much. And there's an unreleased song on Revelation 100, I think. One comp they put out has an unreleased Slipknot song on it.
I don't know if I've heard it, but I like them. They were ugly and shitty sounding. That's what I think the audience for Revelation, that was off of Chain of Strength. I think people were like, no, don't dig it. Don't get it. They look ugly. They're wearing leather jackets. Don't feel it. Who's high at Revelation Records?
Well, that was the rumor, right?
I mean, it would. Yeah, I guess that. It would
allegedly
indicate that.
Allegedly, there was maybe some other business transactions allegedly involved.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I have no idea about that, but I know that Jordan lived up in New Haven and hung out with F, and F was an interesting guy, very into philosophy and Terrence McKenna type of shit, and but those dudes were maniacs too.
Yeah.
I mean, I never hung with them, but they were serious partiers, and the music is dark but cool, exciting. It reminded me of I liked Blast a lot at that time, and that kind of spooky ugliness. It reminded me of Urban Waste too.
Yep.
Like this kind of like shitty ugliness. And yeah, coming off a Chain of Strength and just, clean t-shirts and gelled hair. I was like, I hate what I'm associated with to some degree. And Slipknot was a nice, relief from that. I mean, I'm not to beat up on Chain of Strength, but you know what I mean? Like the idea of this clean cut American way of Revelation star thing that had kind of taken shape at that point. It was just like, okay, yeah, Slipknot, this is great.
Well, there's so much stuff I want to ask you about, like, Walter sings so much stuff. But one last thing on that note, when was that moment for you? Did you have an exact moment when you realized, like that Lou Barlow moment where for him it was, he says when he heard the Committed for Life 7-inch that he loved, but realized that he didn't necessarily like where hardcore was going at that point. Did you have a moment where you were like, I still love it, but it maybe isn't going to be where I'm going?
Yeah, I think it would have been just my interest in music had changed.
Mm-hmm.
I was into, I don't know if it was when, I think it might have been like hearing My Bloody Valentine or Jane's Addiction, things like that, where my musical tastes were just leaving. And also that having gone to Europe and seeing, getting into Sub Pop, those experiences, like just, I realized it was a lot more out there, and I was becoming a musician. You know what I mean? Not just a scene kid. Because I was traveling the world. Playing music, and so I got better. And I was writing a lot of songs then, so I just got more into like actually songwriting, things that I wanted to be. I was just tired of the motif of, we've got to do this. We're going to do it. Say it at the same time. Yes, yes, yes. Who's going to stab me in the back? No, I won't. Like that kind of thing where the themes were all the same. I wanted to say something about me.
Yeah.
And change, which wasn't like such a crazy idea. When you listen to, Black Flag, a lot of that is why it's cool. Talking about depression and things like that. That's what I wanted to talk about. Mm-hmm. And the hardcore scene, I couldn't say there was like something particular that was happening, but it was just had gotten too big in some way, and even wasn't big. You know what I mean? It still wasn't big, but it had reached its apex for me personally, and I needed to go someplace else, but it was nothing like anti it, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I was like, good luck, everybody,
yeah,
let's do our thing, but there's still great shit that was happening that came out. I definitely blanked on a lot of the stuff in the 90s. I just wasn't paying attention to it at all. Unless I was friends with the people in the bands, but it's just a cool name. Hardcore is just cool, and people are always going to be able to pick it up and do something interesting with it if they hit it from the right angle. And like you've definitely done that with Fucked Up, and there's right now I think quite a few bands that are taking the ethos of it and mixing it with something else, and it has the good elements of it, and spun through a different lens. It's new again.
Well, Walter, I think we can end on that note. That's awesome, man. Yeah. This has been a great conversation. As I say, I have a million more questions to ask you, but I will save them for another day.
Beautiful. It's a pleasure talking with you, Damon, and yeah, it's great. So I'm glad we finally made it happen.
Me too.